Whom all praise is due, whom we forever thank for giving America's 20 million so-called Negroes the most honorable Elijah Muhammad as our beloved leader, teacher, and guide. And brothers and sisters, before I have anything whatsoever to say,
Malcolm X was actively fighting for the civil rights movement in the 1950s through the 1960s. He broke many social and racial barriers like segregation and racism. He protested in an aggressive way and made many speeches worldwide, influencing the new and expanding idea of racial equality and black power. He was assassinated in 1965, and this has made a large impact on how the world saw the civil rights movement.
How black people really feel and how fed up we are without that old compromise and sweet talk. Stop sweet talking him. Tell him how you feel. Tell him what kind of hell you've been.
African Americans have been discriminated and segregated against for hundreds of years. Clearly, nobody enjoyed the unjustified treatment that they had been given their entire lives. Some people took the hate and discrimination in their stride, assuming it would always be like this, no matter who or what tries to change that. However, some people tried to step up and make a change in the society that had been corrupted by racism and segregation. Some influences including Rosa Parks, Brown versus Board of Education, Little Rock Nine, Martin Luther King Jr., or the Fair Housing Movement laws, all of which were not only brave enough to stand up for themselves or their community in which it would almost indefinitely lead to their demise, but they also influenced people to do the same in the future. People like Malcolm X, who broke barriers for the future generation to be able to do the same without the same consequences that they had endured in their time. Malcolm X was heavily influenced by Elijah Muhammad to start speaking up like influences before him as well.
Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose?
Ever since North America has been founded, African Americans have been discriminated against all the way from slavery to segregation, as everyone believed that they should be treated differently just because of a pigment in their skin. During the early and mid-1900s, the idea of racial equality started to spread slowly but progressively. Many people such as Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King Jr. stood up for themselves when being segregated. Supreme Court cases were also held to help stop segregation, such as the Brown versus Board of Education. Although this did help for a small amount of time, it definitely did not stop segregation by itself. Obviously, these events made a small spark among society, as everyone knew it was wrong, but they had to wait for someone or something to step up and spread the wildfire.
But the white man also knows that when you clean yourself up, straighten yourself up, and get on God's side and call on God, God has got to answer your call. Not today.
This is when Malcolm X got out of prison and started preaching on the street. And little by little, he gained popularity, and he started speaking in front of thousands in his own rallies. What made him unique was that he rejected the nonviolent civil rights movement, which was Martin Luther King Jr.'s method of protesting and most of the other protesters at the time as well. In his speeches, he often tried to spread the word of black power and racial equality very clearly and aggressively. Malcolm X was listened to by millions around the world. In addition to this, he was voted the second most sought-after speaker in the United States by the New York Times. Later, in 1965, Malcolm X started receiving death threats, and on February 21st, 1965, he was assassinated in the Audubon Theater during a speech in New York City.
Shooting black people down, do you? And you're ready to do something about it, aren't you? We know you are. And the white man should be thankful that God has given the Honorable Elijah Muhammad the control over his followers.
Malcolm X's death caused violent outcries from his followers and supporters. He immediately dropped dead after multiple gunshot wounds he had suffered to his torso. The killers were immediately rushed as well, as they were beaten after trying to leave without being identified. 3 men were convicted of the assassination: Thomas Hagen, Norman Butler, and Thomas Johnson, all of which served 20 years to life sentences. Nonetheless, his death was an unavoidable part of the struggle for racial equality. Many people were deeply affected by his death, yet his passing affected his younger demographic the most because of their naive minds. He said, The press is used to making it look like the black man is the criminal and the police force is the victim. He said this in protest of police brutality. This is a more popular statement because it awakened a lot of Americans about what was just happening after his death.
We are oppressed. We are exploited. We are downtrodden. We are denied not only civil rights, but even human rights.
Malcolm X's death also had a very long-lasting effect on millions around the world. He inspired many civil rights groups like the Black Panthers, many more civil rights leaders, and black militant students. His death was very important to not only the United States, but the entire world, because his death finally awakened many people around the globe about how they should be able to stand up for themselves against unfair segregation that has been holding them down for so long. But now they can break free a little further than they could before. But that is just enough to start a new era of black power and racial equality. Malcolm X's methods are still used to this day, as they have been perfected over time by people who took Malcolm's methods and used them as their own. His death was a sorrowful moment, but at the same time, exactly what the world needed to inspire the end of this horrible era of racial inequality.
Adopts the approach that Martin Luther King has been teaching to our people in that country can point to any meaningful gains that has actually served to solve the problem.
Malcolm X was actively fighting for the civil rights movement in the 1950s through the 1960s. He broke many social and racial barriers like segregation and racism. He protested in an aggressive way and made many speeches worldwide, influencing the new and expanding idea of racial equality. He was assassinated in 1965, and this has made a large impact on how the world saw the civil rights movement, because it awakened many African Americans and the people that were being discriminated against about how it was possible to stand up through adversity and segregation.